Hey everybody, here we are.
Here we are.
Welcome to the 6-month memoir. We have, it's kind of a third class in a little bit of a series. So make sure you've watched the one on character. Make sure you've watched the one on setting.
Yep.
Because generally as we talk about story, we like to talk about it in the sense of taking a character. At least in a novel, you create a character. In your 6-month memoir, you're taking yourself, placing characters in a setting, and the way that those characters interact with that setting is almost the way that characters interact with other characters. So your setting becomes a really crucial part to the story. And then it's in that setting that we introduce a conflict. And so every good story that you've ever read is a character in a setting confronting something.
Yep. I always tell, in my writing classes, I always say, nobody wants to read about your really, really good day. That's not interesting.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah.
I don't want to read a whole book about all your really good days that went exactly how you wanted them to go.
Yeah.
Because while that's a nice life to live, it's not a good story to tell. So we have to have conflict in order to engage our readers with our stories, to give them a reason to want to read. If everything's going to turn out the way that you want it to turn out, what's the point?
Yeah.
You want to see where this story is going to go. What are the hills and valleys that you're going to have to go through to get to the final spot?
Yeah. So this is a good time to start thinking about what are the main conflicts in your story. So the memoir that you're writing, the time period that you're writing about, maybe list them out. List 5, 10 of the main conflicts that you went through. And, we're not going to go through and list all the different types of conflict. If you need those, you can Google them, but you've got interior, you've got, person to person, you've got person nature, all kinds of different conflicts. So think through the types of conflicts that you want to talk about in your story. Now, if you can name the big conflict, so if your major conflict is like an interfamily conflict.
Right. And I wonder if when we say conflict, maybe we could even exchange that with struggle. Maybe you don't even know what the word conflict means in the context of life, like your life story. But we're talking about a struggle. What is it that you are struggling against or struggling with?
Or trying to accomplish.
Or what is the
that whatever that is. Again, within the realm of fiction, we talk about creating a barrier between the character and what the character wants more than anything else in the world. So maybe think about that in regards to yourself. Like, what are the things that you wanted during the time frame of this story more than anything else? Did you want a sense of home? Did you want to fall in love? Did you want to make money? Did you want a successful business? Did you want to, gain a sense of meaning in life? Like, what was the thing that you wanted? And then what were those things that came in between you and realizing that? And that's where your conflict arises. So that's where we're at. We've got a character, which is you, placed into a setting, which we're going to ask that you continue to explore in the context of your stories. But then begin to think about what are the main conflicts? What are the struggles? What are the things that you ran up against in your quest for life? That will hopefully give you some more scenes to write, give you some ideas for stories to tell.
I think one of the main things that identifying conflict, what it can help against, is the monologuing that we can often do in our writing, especially as memoirists. I think you can get into having these lofty ideas of what you want to communicate and what you want to say to people. But if you can boil it down to what is the struggle and what did I do in my life?
What were the stories?
Yeah, what were the stories that helped me to progress and get towards that thing that I wanted? And am I accurately describing the things that stood in the way of that?
Yeah. So if your struggle is about finding a sense of home, we don't want you to monologue for chapter after chapter after chapter about how much you longed for home and how much you wish you had a home and how that made you feel. What we really want to hear is what's a story about the relationship with your parents that shows us why the house you grew up in could never be your home.
Right.
And we want the stories of your roommates, who just continually created a sense of division and anxiety and kept you from realizing this desire to have a place called home. And we want to hear the stories about, you not being able to make enough money, the jobs that you had that kept you from purchasing a home. Like, those are all the things that go into the struggle that a good memoir tells us about.
Speaking of which, Sean Dietrich does a great job of this in his story, because we feel that the overall struggle for him is this need, really, to feel important, to feel worthwhile,
Connected.
to feel like, to feel connected, to feel like more than just
what he thought he was.
Yeah.
Which was a poor kid in rural Florida.
Right. Whose father had committed suicide.
Yeah.
Like, he felt like he was at the very bottom of the social scale. And so the stories that we read along the way show us how he was overcoming that, or that mentality was being reinforced in him.
Yes.
One of the great points in the memoir, if you haven't gotten there yet, hopefully you are, so I'm not spoiling anything, but it's when he starts dating Mary.
Yeah.
And Mary is from the other side of the tracks, as in the rich side of town, and they fall in love, and he thinks this is really going somewhere, and he thinks that him being poor isn't really going to factor into it, and then it does. So they're at a Mexican restaurant, and she breaks the news to him. I'll read that section because it's really... how he uses dialogue is really, really, it's so effective.
Yeah, and I would say don't shy away from dialogue. I know some people are a little hesitant about using dialogue in a memoir because who really remembers exactly how things were said? But I think most readers, when they read a memoir, first of all, dialogue is such a great tool for speeding up the pace and for really engaging the reader. And I don't think most readers assume that you're recreating this dialogue word for word. So give yourself a little bit of leeway, write some dialogue, and you know what? At the end of the day, if you don't like it, you can cut it when you're revising. But I think it can be really helpful in trying to flesh out scenes.
So he's used this chapter telling us about his relationship with Mary, that it was really good. He loved her company, but he was starting to see some parts of her personality that he didn't exactly love, but he was, infatuated, so he was able to overlook it. And then it comes to this point. She tried to break the news gently at a Mexican restaurant. The waiter had just brought our cheese dip. Things aren't working, Mary said. I'm sorry, but it's school and stuff, and it's got me all stressed out. School doesn't start for another few weeks. Well, I mean, I'm about to be stressed out with school, Hey, don't worry about anything. We can handle it. No, I don't think we can. What I mean to say is, well, I'm just so confused right now. I'm so confused with where my life is going. I get confused sometimes too, but it will pass. You don't understand. I'm not confused. I lied about that. I stopped eating mid-chip. I could see it laid out before me. I knew what she was trying to say. I want to see other people, she said. Other people? Yeah, I want to live a little. You should too. You should really do something with your band. You're good. You should be young, I should? Yeah, because you're a great guy. Oh, no. Nobody wants to be a great guy. So he goes on. He's heartbroken about it. And he decides he's going to try and win Mary back after he watches An Officer and a Gentleman with his aunts. He's inspired. He goes to Mary's front door.
And this is a great example of letting the conflict play out. So I think a lot of us would want to just end the story there and say, so we broke up. One of the hallmarks of a great story is when the conflict is allowed to be pulled out over a longer period of time.
Okay, so he goes back to try and win Mary back. Rings the doorbell, has a bouquet of flowers, and then her mom answers the door. Eeks. Ma'am, I just came to give these flowers to Mary. She doesn't want to see you. I know, but you don't understand. I'm not trying to. My husband and I don't want you hanging around anymore. Do you understand? It's over between you two. So he tries to stop her from walking away. And she says, listen to me, Sean. The way she said my name is something I've never been able to unhear. It was as though it had hurt her to say it. You're a nice boy," she went on, "but let's be honest, you're going nowhere." I wanted to disappear forever. Someone dropped me into the bay and let a starving bull shark have his way with my internal organs. "You're not even in high school," she said. "Look at yourself. Where is your future?" "I'm sorry, I really am. Mary got your hopes up. We tried to tell her to leave you alone. I'm sorry she led you on. Now leave this porch and don't come back. Good night." The door shut. I walked to my truck. The Christmas lights on my bumper were glowing multicolored in the darkness. Uneducated, poor, stupid, and futureless. I might as well have been a beggar on their porch shaking a tin cup.
That is perfect, because in that story, you get the essence of what his struggle is.
Yeah.
You recognize, but he doesn't just tell you that. A lot of us as writers, myself included, would be tempted to tell that story in about 2 paragraphs and then write that last paragraph and say, I felt uneducated, poor, But what he does is he gives us a story that shows us all of that and explains why he feels that way, and even why he feels more that way after this story. Mm-hmm. So it's not like he's trying to rescue us from this sense of discomfort about his situation. He's letting the discomfort marinate. He's letting us sit in it. Mm-hmm. He's letting us feel what it's like. Mm-hmm. So think about that with your own conflict, with your own struggle. Don't be too quick to rescue yourself and in return the reader from that struggle.
Because it makes the stakes higher. Because as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, how does he go from being this kid who gets completely rejected by the rich girl in town and is at the very, very lowest point as a teenager you can feel, right? Right. Yeah. And how does he then rise above that to go anywhere after this?
Yeah.
Because it feels like an end point, but we're not even halfway through the story.
Right.
So it's using these stories as a microcosm of the bigger story that you're trying to tell. Yeah. So using these smaller stories to prove the point that this was your struggle all along the way. Mm-hmm.
Embrace the struggle. I think that's what we're trying to say. Embrace the struggles. Slow down when you get to those stories.
Yeah.
Slow down. We want to race through these stories and just get them down and tell them quickly. But pay attention to what Sean's doing. He's not racing through. He's letting his reader go there with him, sinking down into the tough parts, into the hard parts, not rescuing himself so quickly. So that's what we encourage you today. You've got a character that's yourself. You have these other characters that you've introduced. You've placed them in a setting. Keep telling us about these settings. Keep telling stories that happen in these various settings so we can get a sense for where you're at. But then introduce the struggle. Introduce the struggle. Bring us into the really hard parts. And don't let us go. Don't rescue yourself or the reader from those hard parts right away.
It's important to acknowledge that when we go into those conflicts, it might be hard to do that, just on an emotional level.
Yeah.
To go back and relive things that were perhaps really, really difficult to go through. And just have grace with yourself about that.
Yeah.
And maybe be a little more tender as you're going through that these are hard things and having to relive them again might not be easy. But what you're doing is really important. Getting these stories down, telling the truth of what has happened to you. It's so important.
Thanks for listening today. Think about the way that struggle has shaped your story. Dive into telling us specific stories that help us to understand that struggle. In the meantime,
keep writing.